And so may the words of my mouth and the thoughts of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So this is a brief sermon which contains 3 ideas to contemplate. The first idea is of Psalm 23 as a journey. The second idea is about my cup runs over. And then the third idea is the sheep hear my voice. So the first idea then, Psalm 23, it seems to me, takes us on a journey. And the first place that we arrive is in green pastures. So I want you to imagine, as we go through each of these stopping off places, and picture, if you can, your green pastures. Where is this place for you? Is there somewhere special? There are lots of hymns based on Psalm 23, and there's a line that I particularly like in the hymn In Heavenly Love Abiding. And that line is, "Green pastures are before me, which yet I have not seen." There's always something ahead of us, something comforting, something to look forward to. I really like that idea of the green pastures still being ahead of me. And that means that I can stroll through the beautiful countryside, literally, or I can stroll through my thoughts and through my week, looking for this green pasture which is ahead of me. But I also like actually being in the green pasture with its still waters and its refreshing feel and the wonderful smell, perhaps in the late spring or early summer, of a place like that. And of course a pasture, if it's a really wonderful pasture, will have horses in it. And they love being in their pasture. And they breathe deeply. They breathe deeply and they take it all in. It's a place of utter contentment and peace. A place where you may feel refreshed. In the pasture, life is good. It's happy. It's comfortable. And so maybe I would also think of the Lake District on a summer's day. Spent many happy times there with the whole family. Or maybe somewhere in the Peak District, nearer to my own home. But anywhere, really, where I can just feel totally relaxed, totally myself, totally happy and at one with everything. Maybe in your mind you have found your green pasture. Maybe you know where that is. And if you don't know, the hymn tells us that it's just before you, so you will get there. And then in the psalm, we go from the green pasture to the path of righteousness. Now that's a bit more of a difficult place to be, perhaps a stony road, I don't know. The path of righteousness is an inward path. It goes on inside us, and here we must learn right from wrong, and we must learn to act upon it. It's on the path of righteousness that we seek forgiveness, inspiration, motivation. The path of righteousness is not an easy one to walk, and there are many challenges that we meet along the way, not least the valley of the shadow of death. The valley of the shadow of death is a place of danger, a place of fear, a place of the unknown. And there's always a temptation, isn't there, to live in the shadow of something. Is it just me, or are we often in something's shadow? Maybe the shadow of past events, regrets, things we said and did, or things we didn't say or do, all those things we could have achieved if only we'd put our minds to it. The shadow of past regrets. And the shadow of the unknown things of the future, the things we fear, the things we don't know about. But the challenge of the psalm is to live fully in the present moment. Because in the present moment, we find the supper table, the table laden with good things, the cup running over. We find ourselves in the house of the Lord, where we can be forever. There are places of blessing, celebration, and complete well-being. And this is where the psalm leaves us. Can we live in that present moment? Must we always be overshadowed by thoughts of the past and fears of the future? Or can we live in that place that God has set for us, which is the here and now? I want to think a bit more now, we're into the second part. I want to think a bit more now about that supper table and that overflowing cup. What does that image make you think of? These are the words that come to me: generosity, happiness, comfort, fulfillment. And I ask you to compare this in your minds with Jesus' promise of life in all its fullness. I have come that they may have life, life in all its fullness. How do you feel about your life today? Are you living life to the full? Does your cup run over? The overflowing cup teaches us to keep going, never give up, because God's goodness will always be more than enough for us. That's the reason why I never obey the instruction in the worship book to cover over the elements at the end of the service, because there's always more. You can always come back and receive more from God. The cup overflows. So even when there are shadows from past events or worries which lay across our lives, overshadowing everything, God is enough for us. Think also of the verse in 2 Corinthians 12, which says, "My grace is all you need. My strength is made perfect in weakness." There is such grace and glory in the overflowing cup. And it's also a mystery because we have to be open-minded and open-hearted in order to perceive it. But it's worth it if we can open ourselves to God. And then the third part then, just briefly. The sheep hear my voice. Now here's Jesus in his world of psalms. Right, he would have said the psalms every day, wouldn't he? There he is in his world of psalms and in his rural life of sheep and shepherds, picking up on this theme. And in this conversation, he says that he is the good shepherd. So he's linking himself to the psalm that we've been talking about. And he's saying that in him we experience the generosity of God. But the particular verse that I wanted to pick up on was, "The sheep hear my voice." Do you hear his voice? If so, how? Where do you hear it, and what does it say to you? We live in a world of rush and noise and many competing voices. Lots of voices and notifications compete for our attention. I have notifications on top of my phone all the time. This has happened, that's happened, somebody's put this in your bank, you've paid this out, blah, blah, blah. You know, that kind of thing. All the time there's a voice from somewhere else, isn't there? And sometimes it crowds out other things. Sometimes we don't hear the voice of Jesus. But maybe some of the time, the reason we don't hear Jesus' voice is because he's not saying what we expect to hear. He's not saying what we want him to say. His words are subversive or surprising. And maybe we want to hide away from the voice of Jesus. The voice of Jesus is not only comforting, sometimes it's very challenging. But Jesus says to us that we can hear his voice. And the reason we can hear it is because we belong to him. We are his and he is ours. We hear him in relationship. even in the non-rural setting in which we live, there's something lovely, I think, something comforting and something real about this sheep and shepherd imagery. The first readers of John's Gospel might have already been familiar with the parables of Luke's Gospel. I imagine they were. They would have heard Luke's Gospel read out to them many times before John wrote his. Did they know the parable of the lost sheep, do you think? They probably did. And we know it too. And so we remember times, perhaps, when we've been lost, when we felt like we didn't know what to do next. And then from somewhere comes that little inner voice that calls us back to where we need to be. For a while, our life has been disordered, but then things start to come together again as that voice from the depths of us calls us back. And like us, John's first readers would have remembered too how, according to Luke, shepherds were among the first witnesses to the incarnation. Those outsiders, those lowly people who spent their days away from society, out in the hills. And there's a message too in that for all those on the fringes of society. Those who don't quite fit in. Those who feel themselves slightly unacceptable, perhaps, even if others don't perceive them that way. If you're an outsider, listen, because Jesus says, you fit in too. He speaks to you. As we think about these things, we're going to listen to a rendition of George Herbert's The God of Love, My Shepherd Is. So a couple of minutes thinking time.